Good evening to everyone present here. I cordially welcome you all to Tech Bharat 2021, Empowering EduTech and Health Tech. Tech Bharat is an initiative of Lagu Udyog Bharati Karnataka and IMS Foundation. Tech Bharat is envisioned as a platform to support startups and SMEs and be a guiding light to them in navigating their entrepreneurial journey. We welcome you to this session on healthcare, innovation, research, and regulatory compliance. Healthcare in India needs to become innovative and affordable. Challenges like accessibility and affordability continue to pose questions. In this scenario, the role of innovation and research is paramount in making India not only self-sufficient but also self-reliant in healthcare. Together with these, regulatory compliances and policies to ensure healthcare and allied services ensure highest quality standards and transparent practices is essential. To discuss this further, we have an eminent panel with us today. Firstly, I would like to welcome Dr. P. Chinmay P. Chigateri, founder, Health Minds, and thank him for accepting to moderate the session. Chinmay is the founder and principal consultant of Health Minds, a public health consulting and healthcare communications company. Dr. Chinmay is the sharp end of the organization and is responsible for business development, client relations, investor relations, and driving the overall strategy of the company. Prior to founding Health Minds, he has consulted with various organizations in areas of medical publishing, healthcare, IT, and research advisory. We warmly welcome you to the panel discussion. We have Dr. Nagendra Hegde, professor at National Institute of Animal Biotechnology with us. We thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome you, Professor. We have Dr. Arun A.B., Professor and Deputy Director, Enepoya Medical University. We welcome you to the session and we are excited to have you as part of this discussion. We have Dr. Raghuveer Ramachandra, Founder, Galatrex with us today. A warm welcome you to this session. I now will request Dr. Chinmay to take over the session and moderate it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vishu. That was a very nice introduction, and thank you to all our panelists for joining us today, and welcome to this panel discussion on the healthcare innovation, research, and regulatory panel. I would like to start by introducing each of our panelists this evening. First, Dr. Guru Prasad Medikeshi. Dr. Guru Prasad heads one of the oldest labs at the very young age at THSTI. Currently an associate professor, Guru leads the cellular and clinical virology laboratory at the Translational Health Science and Technological Institute. He's also in charge of the academics at THSTI and has streamlined the academic process by setting up a transparent and robust academic structure in place to nurture talent and maintain high academic standards. He said, we failed to realize that we did not have 100% of the distractions that our students experience today, which I feel is extremely relevant. We should take the responsibility for making science interesting and appealing for smart people, both in terms of content and quality. Dr. Guru, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, sir.
My next panelist is Dr. Nagendra Hegde, professor at the National Institute of Animal Biotechnology. Dr. Nagendra Hegde completed his, the veterinary sciences, both masters and bachelors in veterinary microbiology and public health from the University of Agricultural Sciences in Bangalore, and a PhD from the University of Nebraska in the USA. Dr. Hegde's research experience spans veterinary virology, immunology, and microbiology. His major contribution has been in virology, where he's worked on epidemiology, genomics, diagnosis, and prevention, as well as interaction with host cells of animal DNA and RNA viruses. His research interests are to understand the epidemiology, genomics, and biology of important livestock diseases, to devise protective measures for these diseases, and to elucidate fundamentals of immunological responses. Dr. Hegde, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this panel discussion.
Thank you, Chinmay, and I thank Bharat for having me here.
My next panelist is Dr. Arun A.B., Professor and Deputy Director of the QAC of the Yenapoya Medical College and University. Arun A. Bhagwat is currently serving as Professor of Yenapoya Research Center and Deputy Director of Quality Assessment and Compliance at the Yenapoya Mangalore. In his current capacity, he manages strategic thinking, planning, proposal preparation, SWOT analysis, critical reviews, technology forecasting, communicating with global audience, securing deals, data management, and a host of other responsibilities. He is a PhD from Mangalore University in the year 2002 from the Department of Biosciences. Dr. Arun, welcome to this panel discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
And my final panelist is Dr. Raghuveer Ramachandra. He's the founder of Gallo TX. Is that how it's pronounced, sir? Right. Dr. Raghuveer is a scientist and entrepreneur. He completed his graduation from the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, Mumbai, and obtained a doctorate from the University of West Virginia. With nearly 20 years of professional experience in various positions in India and US, he started Gallo TX, a biotech startup focusing on discovery and development of novel therapeutic small molecules for treating various indications, including cancer and inflammation. He has led Gallo TX to be a mature, revenue-generating small biotech, leading strategic and growth opportunities. Intend to continue in an advisory or board role, helping the company steer through the initial phase of growth. Dr. Raghuveer, thank you very much for joining us. I think there'll be a lot of questions aimed at you, perhaps mainly on innovation and entrepreneurship. So welcome to you, sir.
We look forward to an interesting conversation.
Thank you. Just before we start, it seems like all of us on this panel seem to have some sort of exposure to microbiology and virology and immunology, and so am I. My background is also in infectious diseases. So I don't know, we hope not to be absolutely biased towards that subject. We'll try to cover a gamut of topics. So we'll get started. So I would, kind of now try to invite each one of you to just make some opening remarks, perhaps for between 5 and 6 minutes, about what you feel is the innovation and research ecosystem in this country. We will perhaps talk about regulatory compliance a little later, because I think we can very easily get into too many technical aspects when it comes to regulatory. And so let's start with some opening remarks on innovation and research. And I think we have a good mix of panelists here. We have a few entrepreneurs. We have a lot of representation for academia. So I would like to hear each one of your perspectives about how innovation research is conducted in a startup setting, in an academic setting, and what are your initial thoughts on it. So I would like to invite Dr. Guru Prasad from the Translation Science and Technological Institute now. And Dr. Guru, can you give us a feel for what you feel is the innovation and research ecosystem in academia in India today? And perhaps what is that we lack, and what is that we could do better? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chinmay. So when we talk about the innovation ecosystem, I think there is a huge potential. If you really look at the number of universities in India, I believe there are about 700 universities. And we probably have, I think, close to 200 research institutes and equal number of medical institutions. The problem here is a disconnect between these institutions. So there is a disconnect between the discovery science and the translational part. And also there is a disconnect between, let us say, a veterinary research versus human health research, whereas in the end, they are actually interconnected. If you really take this pandemic as an example, if you really understand how, say, pathogens circulate in either animal reservoirs or in the environment, we would be able to actually take preventive measures that would help human health. But this aspect is somewhere, not focused upon or not much emphasized. So although we have a huge potential, the challenges are actually also to prioritize our research. And even in terms of manpower, I think the focus on research and research priorities has to be actually, it has to be probably implemented at the undergraduate level. What's happening now is even the postgraduates who get their master's degree have very little skills or expertise, or even that bent of mind towards research. So most of them, when they come out, they would need another year or two of rigorous training by most of us. I mean, most of our labs, I'm sure others also would agree, that we actually spend 1 or 2 years after their post-graduation to make them fit for research. And I think a lot of this has to happen when they are actually studying, where there is scope for connecting theory with practicals. So that actually, when they get their degrees, they should be research ready. That's not happening. I think one area should be really to focus, perhaps under Skill India, maybe we should focus on really skilling manpower for research. And that can happen only if research really is a priority and is looked upon as an attractive option. So most of the time, if you ask any student now who finishes his 12th, they are either into IT or engineer or doctor or architecture. You will hardly have even 1% saying they want to do research. So that's because probably the awareness of what it takes to do research and how exciting it can be, what are the challenges, and ultimately how researchers contribute to, even if you want to say GDP, is not really estimated at all. So I think overall the society has to become research oriented and research conscious and has to appreciate researchers. So that's where that frame of mind has to change. I mean, you have to really start thinking of research as a inherent component of your education, not something you do after you finish education. Over. So I would like to hear other panelists' comments on this.
Thank you very much. We can address you as Guru, right? That should be.
Yeah. That's fine.
Dr. Arun, we will skip over to you. What is that we are doing in this country in academic innovation and research? How far are we, or how short are we on that?
Yeah, that's a good summary which has been given by Dr. Guru. I think I also endorse that view. At the research activity, to be honestly speaking, it should start at a undergraduate level. It has to be very robustly, I mean to say, sort of a group projects, and then slowly moving on to over the course period of time. It should be more focused research activity, especially selection of thrust areas and the ecosystem which need to be developed in the academic institution. Because even though you want to do R&D activity, probably you don't have those kind of labs in an academic setting, because they are more focused into academics, and it's more a dissemination kind of activity which is going on, and generation kind of activity which are being envisaged. So it involves a huge amount of money to be pumped in terms of getting those research infrastructure into the universities and colleges, because that's not happening at this point. It's only less, it's more a collection of fees, and the resource generation there is no other sources of resource generation. It's basically fees which is going to come from the student, which is charged, and that is being now looked at, especially the private setup. It is more like that. I mean to say, there is no serious thought process of that dash amount of money need to be spent on R&D activity, promotion of R&D activity. Until you have a strong R&D activity or ecosystem, innovation, startups, these are all, it can be a part, quickly, it can be a short-term vision. It cannot be a long-term sustaining efforts. So it needs to be, if you are seriously, we are looking at those ecosystem to be developed, I think good amount of funding in terms of national funding agencies, as well as the private sector, as well as the governments from those institutions should have a resource mobilization strategy, which needs to be coming into the establishment of centers, dedicated centers or aware centers where people can walk in and they can discuss those with those expertise available in those centers, so that interdisciplinary thought process can go into those, and then slowly that converts into kind of a idea where it can be lead to a innovative ecosystem. Otherwise, again, each professor, each student, they will have their own areas. They keep, as we discussed, we will be doing only those kind of things, which is not going to, go anywhere. So undergraduate research, postgraduate research, as well as PhD, these three, those activities need to be very, very strongly monitored, strongly coordinated, as well as there should be a good network of interdisciplinary activities being, ecosystem to be provided, and the necessary equipment, necessary manpower, necessary expertise should be made available, at least in a small setting, rather than having a big, big institutions, labs, and those kind of things. Of course, they are doing it. But having said that, academic institutions are struggling to meet that. So there should be something very serious thought process in those directions. That's what my take on that.
Thank you, Dr. Arun. And I think I'll come back to some of the points you made during our discussion further along. Professor Hegde, sir, what are your thoughts on this? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, couple of things that I'd like to touch upon in addition to what Guru and Arun have stated. And one of the things that I would like to mention here is Guru stated there are several, we have so many universities, but unfortunately what happens, most of these universities grant a 3-year PhD degree, which to me is not sufficient. Because the UGC mandates, you have to have 1 semester or 2 semesters of coursework. And then, as Guru says, they need another year or so to get a wet lab experience. So by the time they graduate, they are really not ready for either basic sciences or, innovation. Although I do agree a certain percentage of people do really excel, but that's just a small percentage. So we really have to move on to a system where they spend a considerable amount of time doing investigative research, understand how research works, and to tell you the fact, and I'm sure others agree, 70% of the experiments that we do fail. So people need to understand that and then really contribute to science. So that is one thing that I'd like to add. And the second thing is that the medical colleges to a large extent are not geared up for research at all. A lot of the advancements in medical sciences come from researchers who have a basic science background. I'm not saying it's a negative, but I think medical colleges do need to gear up for some of the fundamental research. I do understand there's a huge clinical responsibility that they have, but I think there needs to be some integration between research and the clinical side from the medical schools. And the third thing I'd like to touch upon is that right from the school age, we push children to go into IIT or NEET or whatever it is. From 6th or 7th standard, they go into so-called these coaching classes. But I think as a society, we should also tell our children about alternative careers. I'm not particularly stating about research, but also, maybe commerce or maybe humanities, arts, these kind of things, because more and more healthcare research doesn't only depend on medical subjects. There are also other things like social and behavioral sciences, epidemiology and statistics, even engineering for that matter, besides just basic science. So all these things have to be taken into account. And I think there has to be some sort of an overhaul. And I'm not saying it needs to be immediate, but maybe over the time. Thank you.
So thank you very much, sir. I think those were points really well made, and we'll speak a little bit about that after Raghuveer has made his opening comments. Raghuveer, over to you.
So I have a very unique perspective. I was in academics. I was in a R&D unit of a large pharma company for about 10 years, and now I'm a scientist entrepreneur. So from my perspective, if you consider all of humanity's knowledge as a huge circle, you make a dent towards outside to extend that knowledge to some extent. That is an innovation, that is a research. So if when we are dealing with an innovation or a new research, that is a brand new situation that humanity has never encountered so far. So as a society, we have put some regulatory framework to determine what is acceptable and what is not. I think that is absolutely necessary. On the other hand, it should not end up tying the hands and legs of an innovator to explore new avenues, new possibilities. There has to be a balance in terms of how much you can allow the new thing and how much it has to be regulated. I think that is where we are heading. As I listen to the panelists so far, I think we should focus on the aspects that hold us back in terms of regulatory framework and that encourage us to explore new possibilities and new innovation. In terms of academic setting and what is given as a training, as a preparation for launching their career as innovator or as entrepreneurs, I think there is a lot of room to improve, but there has already been several examples in front of us who have excelled as entrepreneurs, as scientists, researchers, and I think there are some things that are definitely working, and there is obviously always room for improvement. And I would like to listen from all of you, your perspectives on how we can improve these situations to encourage innovation. I will definitely bring forward some of the limitations that I have faced as an entrepreneur in the last 3 years or so. I would like to definitely hear some perspectives and solutions from the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Raghuvi. I would now want to skip over to Guru. And Guru, I think most of us here have studied abroad, so have I. We have seen some of the best labs in the world. I just wanted to understand your perspective. Everywhere, I mean, at least in the developed world, we see that university research actually drives the innovation ecosystem in those countries. For example, in the US, even companies would grant money to university scientists to actually drive the innovation ecosystem, whether it's developing new products, new techniques, and things like that. Some of that culture I have seen completely missing in India, barring a few, perhaps doing some clinical trial with a medical university with some pharma companies, but it's never really at a innovation inception level. What do you think has been the roadblock, for us to be in that kind of environment in India?
See, if you basically look at our education system, our emphasis is already mostly on really, passing the exams. So we never train, people to really, figure out what it is. Whether it is biology or physics or chemistry, you may have some practical classes where you have a fixed set of modules and you teach them. But there is never a challenge thrown at a student and say, okay, why don't you figure out what happens if you do this? Because there is no reward for risk. It's always like, okay, let's play safe. You just focus on the syllabus, finish this, pass your exams, and then you will get opportunities to figure out later. And that later never happens to most of the students, right? Once you get your degree, you are mostly focused on further building your career. You no longer think of solving problems. So this problem solving based education is what we need for people to then, think of problems. Only when you think of problems, you think of innovations. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, right? I'm sure Dr. Raghuvir would understand. I mean, innovation doesn't come if you don't see the problem. Only when you say, okay, I need a, I need a better way of, writing. So you have a iPad. So you don't want to carry 10 books. So then you have a small tablet in your hand, which has everything you need. So somebody is thinking about problems. Therefore, then there is a connection. I cannot really innovate everything. I don't have the expertise. So perhaps I'll talk to an IT guy and maybe somebody will say, okay, we can write an algorithm for this and we can reduce your time for analysis. So all this can only happen when you really think of problems. If you don't think of problems, if you only have solutions in front of you and just say, okay, you go from A to B and you'll get it. Most people just do that. I think we just need to change our thinking and our questioning pattern, and we need to really, reward the risk. Of course, people will fail when they try, but that shouldn't be a deterrent, and you need to encourage. So that should happen in all areas, whether it's medical education or basic sciences or starting a new company. I'm very sure it's a huge risk for a new entrepreneur to start a new company because there is no guarantee that you would succeed. But if you always feel that, oh, if I fail, my life will end, why would I try this? Let me just get a job and build a career. Then you wouldn't really see any innovation. You wouldn't really face any challenges.
No, but my question was more targeted towards companies trying to collaborate with academia to actually bring out new innovation. Like in the US, most of the big product companies that you have seen today actually have university roots. Do you feel that Indian industry has a lack of confidence in Indian academia to actually be part of innovation ecosystems?
Well, I think it's a chicken and egg problem, because industries don't reach out to academia, academia doesn't reach out to industry. So I think it has to be a crosstalk. It cannot be one way. It cannot be a one-way traffic. And of course, for academia to attract industries, the quality of education, quality of training, and the quality of thinking has to be at that level. I'm sure people would like to go and talk to Harvard or Rockefeller or Stanford because you do have that critical mass there. So then for us, really, we need to then invest in our own Harvards, our own Stanfords. So for industry to talk to us, what do I have to offer to an industry? So I'll give you an example of this pandemic situation. So now, as a lab, as an accredited lab, we now established validated assays for any vaccine developer to come to us. Now we have pretty much both Indian and international companies which talk to us and say, okay, can we collaborate with you? We need to do these assays for our vaccine development. No, so that they talk to me because now I have established something and that is of global quality. Why would anybody talk to me if I have nothing? So I think academia needs to understand the industry's perspective and the needs of the industry and invest in the right direction. And the industry needs to communicate its needs to the academia and say, hey guys, can you please look into this? Can we solve this problem together? So that communication has to start. And for that to start, we have to have a critical mass of people who really want to solve problems, who can identify problems. So that's where we need to focus on. I believe that's the direction, at least one of the directions we need to take over.
I would like to get Dr. Arun's perspective on this. He is leading this, the research, he's the director of research. I want to understand what has been the level of academia industry interaction, Dr. Arun?
I agree with Dr. Guru's argument that yes, there need to be a critical mass in these institutions which can attract industries to come to you to solve their problems. At the same time, academia also need to get up to those challenges in terms of creating that ecosystem in the institutions, because I feel that's completely lacking, because who will come and join these institutions if those ecosystem doesn't exist? See, now to nurture that, it takes a huge amount of efforts in terms of putting up resources, putting up manpower, putting up kind of research thrust areas where you are going to talk about, and then translation which needs to happen, a solid background of kind of fundamental science which is going on, which leads to an translational sciences, and which is connected to the innovation, etc. So there need to be a pipeline, integrated pipeline to happen. It takes years of efforts to any institution to come to that level. So to come to that level, probably kind of a thought process which should go into these institutions is to establish that environment in terms of management decisions which are to be supported to that kind of a fund initially. Now, who will fund this? That's a question which comes every time. So basically, who the managements and kind of government institutions, everybody needs to think in this direction, that how this system should be established, which can give that kind of a leverage to the student. Student can think beyond the certain his curriculum. So industry also basically would not come to you until you have that kind of expertise and kind of a translation which is happening, and then only they would be very happy to come and invest in those institutions.
But I go back to this issue about funding, and I think what we have seen is, of course, India in its ability to fund fundamental research or any other type of research is quite limited when, of course, in a relative scale, when we compare to the developed world. But do you also feel that there is a lack of confidence for funding agencies? I mean, it doesn't always have to be public money. It could always also be a lot of private trusts which fund a lot of big research projects, abroad. Do you feel that there is a lack of confidence for these funding agencies to actually put money in Indian academia? Because our quality of research has been very subpar so far, barring a few institutes, that we can really count on our fingers. Dr. Hegde, and then I would like to bring Dr. Arun into this conversation. Professor, what do you feel about this?
As far as funding is concerned, there are funds available pretty much everywhere for anything you want to do. It's just that, I do sit on some committees and things like that. It's just that many times the projects that come are just like Me Too. So, or are very incremental, and we don't see something that is quite disruptive. And I'm talking about translational sciences, not necessarily academic science, because academic science is many times incremental.
Correct.
So we definitely don't see things that are disruptive. And if I can go back to the conversation about universities, we did have good universities before independence, and I'm sure they were centers of excellence, at that time. Somehow, after independence, when the number of universities proliferated, and they just became degree granting. So when that happens, obviously, knowledge base as well as innovation or the amount of discovery that gets reduced, and universities do not want to take risks. There are a lot of other complications involved, which I will not go into the details. And even if companies sometimes want to ally with the universities, many times they go into the universities just to get a certification on stamping. Because it's a government institute, if they get a letter from them, they can apply for certain other, compliance or regulatory compliance or whatever. So this has sort of become the norm, and there is no incentive for them to write research grants, competitive research grants. And if you talked about US, in the US, go to smaller universities, some cases they are avoided from their teaching responsibility, and that doesn't happen in India, because the person who teaches the highest will also be the person who will be getting the highest research grants. So he or she needs to manage and both even in the smaller institutions. And I'm not just generalizing, saying that the universities are not doing well. There are departments or individual investigators that are doing extremely well. I think there's a lot of that is happening, and a lot of funds are available. So it all depends on how we actually move ahead and trickle into the university systems and pick their brains and pick the best, and then foster these inter or collaborative research in India.
I'll skip over to Raghuveer and just get the other perspective. Raghuveer, you are an entrepreneur. You've built a biotech company. I'm sure all of your innovation was driven in-house, right? Or did you have any academic collaboration or not? If you did, why? If you didn't, then why?
Yeah, so we are discovering new drugs, novel drugs to treat initially cancer and rheumatoid arthritis. So these drugs are completely designed from scratch, from protein sequences. We have our own platform to design these drugs and synthesize them. So in the process of evaluating their potency and safety and toxicity, we have some tie-ups with some academic institutions. Unfortunately, some academic partnerships could not materialize because some of the arrangements in those institutions are designed for a tie-up with a large pharma company. For example, there is a 40% overhead, and there is certain amount of funding that need to be provided to the academic institution from us
Right.
which as a startup, it is very hard for me to pay my own people, and it is it's a challenge for us to provide that kind of academic support to the academic institution over and above the work that we are planning to do together. And so some of those systems probably we need to relook and evaluate, because initially I agree, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the partnership probably would come from big pharma companies, R&D unit to the academic university or unit. But right now, I think a lot of innovation is happening from by these small biotech startups. I can speak for only biotech because I have been in this space for some time now. A system probably need to accommodate requirements of a small biotech company where there is a requirement for an expertise, sharing of expertise, probably infrastructure, but sharing of the cost is probably not feasible at this moment. But when an innovation becomes a product in the market, it becomes available for people to buy and pay for. That time probably a revenue sharing arrangement can be made, and that kind of arrangement probably needs to be brought together. In this kind of circumstances, probably private universities and autonomous universities, autonomous institutions are probably at an advantage, because they probably have a little bit more freeway and leverage to design these kind of deals and structures. But I think that has been my experience. That some institutions who are willing to go accommodate startups requirement are doing it with us, and some who are not able to because of their systems that are in place. We are not able to use their expertise, although we would like to.
But as a biotech entrepreneur, what is your level of confidence in Indian academia to actually be part of an innovation ecosystem?
Oh, I have no doubt. There are some labs that are doing excellent work, not less than any other world-class lab in the world. They are publishing papers. They are doing excellent research. They have some setups that are very unique, that are not available anywhere else in the world. For example, some labs in Bangalore itself.
But that is far and few, right?
Sure. They, the postdocs from there establish their own labs. Probably they will start something new. The students from there will have positions elsewhere. They will probably start something new. I mean, we have to start somewhere, right? So there are some labs that can do this job and that can accommodate requests of the industry, or willing to share their expertise with the industry. That is also very important, because focus in the incentives for an academic institution and a faculty is to publish and move forward in his career or her career. Collaborating with an industry probably we regard it as a sell-off rather than to entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that kind of willingness also has to be there from the academia. Only then I think that gelling between the academia and the industry can happen.
Yeah, so it is certainly achievable. If you look at some of the recent initiatives of Department of Biotech to how to help each other. If I have to talk about my own experience in the last 6 months, so we have established now a bioassay lab at THSTI, which is purely a service-based lab, but we are open to academic collaborations and also to work with industries. Now, this is a unique initiative, and perhaps it will catch up with other institutes too. So ours is the only NABL accredited laboratory. So it's a GLP facility.
Right.
Now many startups. So we have, in the last 6 months, I think we have helped at least 20, 25 companies to validate their products. So the institute has been very open to this collaboration, and Raghuveer is right, because sometimes it looks like, okay, now you are only doing company work, where is your research? So that question comes, but it's for the institute to say, hey guys, look, this is important, because what we are doing is also a service to the nation. I mean, you publish a paper, you further your career, that's fine. but then what is it that is, what is it that the system gets from your papers and your career? So it's important as a citizen of India, as a probably one way of doing that. Every company is not there to just make profit, right? So there is also a bigger vision and mission for those companies too. I think the funding agencies have to take this initiative where they say we incentivize collaborations with industry. So we want to create niche areas. We want to create clusters. So you pick the areas. It doesn't matter. You can have a neuroscience specialty somewhere. You can have a IT hub somewhere. You can have a biotech hub somewhere. You can have a diagnostic hub somewhere.
Right.
It's important to create these niche areas and incentivize this. It requires the same scientists to get involved, and for the same scientists to get involved, you need to have that ecosystem where this is really encouraged and not looked upon as somebody who cannot do research is now working for a company. That's not the case, and I'm sure most of you agree that people who can do well in their fundamental research can also do well with collaborations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Professor Hegde, what are
Over.
your thoughts on this? How do you democratize the innovation ecosystem?
You specifically pointed towards medical colleges, so I'll jump in directly there. I think one of the things is we have to first recognize that we don't have enough doctors. So our medical education is more driven towards getting graduates out there, MBBS or maybe specialties and things like that. So as of now, we are more geared towards putting more doctors per person in India, and that is a dire need. So I think it will take time for the medical colleges themselves to engage in these kinds of translational research, other than just clinical research that they can do. But as Guru suggests, I think it is all up to us as big institutes or the government to facilitate or to handhold working with a scenario between the medical colleges and the basic science or the translational investigators. And I do agree with Guru that anyone who has done some fundamental science and has seen through the excitement would at some point like to reach to the patient. So I think there has to be a bridge where we are sort of government. I think they are already doing it. We should be forced to actually go and work with the medical or the veterinary fraternity. And I have been a veterinarian, and we have just now started a major program where we are looking at zoonotic diseases. So, and we have like 20-25 centers across India. We work with medical colleges, we work with the veterinary colleges, institutes from Department of Animal Husbandry, ICMR, and things like that. So, and that basically came through because the government wanted us to work that way. So I think there's also a push from the government to for the companies or the industry to work with the academia, and as well as a transdisciplinary approach. I think it's a bit new in India. It takes a little bit of time because collaboration and putting big teams is sort of in infancy in India. But I think we are going to get there. And if to answer your question in a short this thing, I think it will happen, and the way has begun. But the medical colleges themselves also need to gear up for this. So there has to be a change in their thought process as well.
Thank you. Dr. Arun, we heard Professor Hegde talk about how medical colleges have to gear up to take on this, the storm of innovation that would sweep through. What do you think is the preparedness of our medical schools to actually, take on this barrage of industry collaborations, and what is the quality of our researchers, and what do you think about our training systems in research?
Yeah, first, briefly, there is two challenges here. One challenge is whether, because basically, if you look at medicine, it's a professional pipeline, which is already fixed in parents' mind as well or the universities. They have been tuned to, their whole mindset is tuned to be more professional approach in terms of getting their profession. I mean to say, they are getting better salaries, the better opportunities, and better hospitals, a better corporate setup where there is a lot of money which is goes into. And that's a very straightforward, submission. So why one would look into going into innovation, struggling into those startup, getting your startup, and then going into making an industry? I think absolutely that, as Guru Prasad said, these systems are risk free. The way the moment you enter, you graduate and come out as something which is substantially economically, you are secure in terms of you don't want to take a risk. Now, who is that? How much % of this set of people who want to take that kind of a risk and go into something, doing something? Because there is a lot of demand ratio. Demand ratio, supply and demand ratios are different, as Dr. Hegde also mentioned. So we need more doctors to come out and treat patients. So you would have evidence that during the pandemic. Now, healthcare needs are something which is huge amount of demand is there in the market. So I don't see in the near future also people greatly involving in these kind of innovation or startup. But one is that. The second is, most of the medical schools have not invested in R&D. R&D per se is not their part of any curriculum growth, or their self it won't give them anything addition to what they are doing. So one should be really doing it until there is a scene of change where administrations or management says that you have to do research, 20% of your time to be dedicated to do research and dash, and just whatever the regulator is saying, you have to publish 2 paper or 4 paper, which is a very easy task to do in terms of you have a number of patients. And then do some study, which is very much easy to publish. I think anyway that the benchmarking is also not there in terms of they have to publish here or they have to publish here. It's a simple thing which they can do it without any much problem, because they are sitting right on the gold mine of patient. A lot of patient data is available. So I don't see something of that nature, regulatory nature, which is there, which mandates people to do something. One is that. Second, there is no ecosystem. It needs to be like basic science setup, which can be easy, takes some time of theirs, and try to, the problem statement should come from the, people who are working on that, front line. Probably they would be able to, people who are working, and then you come together, have a interaction with the, different disciplines, and then create something. Are people who take all the things, a sort of cluster, which makes us, as Dr. said, that's a right step, wherein you are creating a clusters. But this should happen in medical schools as well as those technology schools. Technologies also need to come into these medical schools to talk to each other, so that it can be integrated in a much more translated fashion. That's what my way.
Professor Hegde, I have one question. We kind of started to focus overtly on the medical college ecosystem so far, but I want to go and skip over to the life sciences departments and other departments in that are perhaps connected directly or indirectly to healthcare. Well, the panel here is a discussion on healthcare, but I think we should not leave this out. You coming as a professional and as an academician that is outside of mainstream healthcare, what do you think is the potential for basic life sciences and the institutes that we have today? What do you think is the preparedness for good research in this institute? I mean, I want to take out the premier institutes out of this question. I'm not talking about the Indian Institute of Sciences. I'm not talking about the National Institute of Advanced Studies, but I'm talking about regular institutions who also have PhD programs, right? What do you think are the preparedness of those institutes to be part of something cutting edge?
I have already alluded to this a little bit, where PhD programs, as I said, have to be driven towards some sort of substantial work of research. So this, I think, is lacking. When people are told that you have to graduate in 3 years, that's impossible in research. We all know that. There are going to be stumbling blocks, sometimes the research starts late and things like that. So if you look at the regular universities, I think we should not say that, you have to graduate in 3 years. It has to be a bit open-ended. And I do understand there are issues with fellowships and time-bound this thing and all that. And also there has to be some sort of incentivization for the research faculty to delve into fundamental and basic research. Our university system say the same university, so there is some sort of fundamentals or basics available there, and you have to realize those people who don't usually go into medical and human resource never even going into university, but somehow by not creating a sort of an ecosystem to do high-end research, either through funding support, or maybe it's to be bridged, I think. So-called what we call the card system, where they have to tick off so many available and they can publish in anywhere. It doesn't need to be in the top science top-notch journals, but there has to be some quality. And I will not define quality through impact factor or citations and things like that. So we have to some lot more, and I'm sure there is manpower, I'm sure there is human resource. If we build up enough infrastructure and as for the translational science, I think we can do it.
Sir, but you also mentioned that you sit on a lot of these funding committees, and you have always observed that the projects presented to you have been subpar. Nothing disruptive is the word you use. What do you think is the reason for that? Is it fundamentally that the faculty, the research faculty in these universities are not up to the mark, or is just that student interest or students' drive to do something disruptive is lacking? Why are we not able to have a certain thought process that where people actually are now standing in line to fund these projects, rather than actually start saying that, okay, we will do some compromised funding, we'll do best amongst the worst sort of scenario?
This is a very, very difficult and complex question to answer. It's not a single thing that I can point out. So there is a lack of good students, lack of good faculty, lack of infrastructure, and then the whole system of you come and teach and take your salary and go. So and on top of it, the proliferation of paid journals with so it is a combination of a lot of things. I don't think we are going to address it with a single agenda. It has to come from various different places. So that doesn't mean that we don't get good proposals. We do get good proposals, even from sometimes far off places in Jammu and Kashmir and things like that, where they are looking at local problems. I think we have a lot of such issues where very, very regional and local problems can be taken up. So instead, if we run after the major global things, I mean, I won't mention about COVID and things like that. We also have that problem. Let's say we work on some disease that is raging in Africa, but not yet here in India. So why do we worry about such diseases when we don't have it in India, except for a few select labs who need to be geared up for preparedness? So, I mean, these are the things, that we really need to think about. And there are a lot of such problems within India. So we need to basically look at what do we have in this country and then contribute towards that. So that sort of thing. So it's as we, the ecosystem is a wonderful word. So basically you have to look at various different angles and try to improve one by one. So I don't think you can really pinpoint one thing and say, the university, this is why the universities are actually not contributing much. I'm sure there are individual labs that are really doing well, as I have already said. So it's possible. There has to be an overall change where everybody needs to go up there and they should say, okay, getting a research grant is mandatory for you.
Right. I would like to now skip over to talk a little bit about our curriculum education in undergraduate and postgraduate level. Perhaps postgraduate has a little bit of exposure to research, but undergraduate, we have simply, zero exposure to research is my feeling. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you think we should do to change it?
Absolutely, that's very essential. Even though now ICMR has some sort of a initiative called STS project, short-term fellowship programs. So it's of 3 months to 4 months, but it is not yet. I mean to say, it's not sufficient exposure to to the R&D kind of a culture, which is required to be pushing those agenda. But our curriculum should invariably, the recent one modified whatever the competency-based curriculum which is currently available probably addresses those needs in the early stages of undergraduate programs. But still, that whatever is said, it's a sort of a ritual. They have included in the curriculum, and somebody has to do it. So it's not going to. I mean to say, it's not going to be as a kind of a motivating factor wherein the people selecting the R&D as a career or very seriously, they are going to take that as a kind of sort of a career path. So what I feel strongly is, even though that has been introduced, there should be a systematic mechanism wherein, in the first year, you give them the sufficient exposure to kind of a review writing processes, literature survey, etc. Slowly in the phase 2, you take them towards, having their own ideas, rather than giving it as an individual projects, you can combine them, combine 3 or 4, and then, they can come up with some sort of a challenge where unmet needs are there, and give them some challenge, and from there they start working towards that, and within that stipulated time, wherever it is, and slowly then try to give them the exposure to publishing and kind of a ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, wherein they can go into incubation system, etc. So at least set of people who can be motivated to take up that as a career. I think early introduction in school, as well as in the early stages of undergraduate program, there should be a mechanism, systematic mechanism, which need to be underlined, and then from there they have to take that path kind of a thing. So probably by doing that, at least 5 to 10% students can be motivated towards that direction, because there are people who are interested to do. What we see is a lot of students who are now very, very keen in participating in these kind of programs, and probably by doing that, at least in the PG also, there is a dissertation component. Again, for 2.5 years they keep working on that with some problem, but still, when it comes for a publication point of view, they have their own challenges to publish, and then because the data, whatever they have planned, may not be sufficient enough, so the global journals have their own standards, and it will take its own time to publish. So they do have challenges in publishing again. So many good paper, good data goes into wrong journals, and the kind of a wrong data goes into good one. So we don't know that there are a lot of, as Dr. Hegde also mentioned, there are a lot of confusions there in the whole process. But having said that, undergraduate, there is a huge amount of opportunities, but it needs to be systematically, path has to be a defined, well-defined path by the regulators as well as by the institution. Probably that would give us more exposure to R&D activities, early exposure.
Thank you. Dr. Guru, I would like to, you're a postgraduate guide. I'm sure you have a lot of PhDs and postdocs under you. How do you change thought process of these scientists to perhaps, take on more cutting edge work, or even sort of see how to commercialize these products going forward? Maybe to somebody like a Raghuveer is a great example of a scientist and entrepreneur. How do you motivate these your students of yours to actually go down that direction?
I think it's important to connect your research process to application. I think that's where probably there'll be emotional investment even from the student side. So if I fail to explain how this the discovery or the research project that they are involved in is ultimately leading to something useful, there'll be no emotional connect with what they are doing. So it's very essential. I think even from the curriculum point of view, it's important that maybe right from the undergrad level, we probably need to have a small portion of our curriculum dedicated to applied sciences. I'm sure Dr. Raghuveer would agree. I mean, if people know what exactly is going to be the application of what they study. I mean, I'm also a father, so my children keep asking me, what's the use of algebra? I'm never going to use it in my life. So it's difficult for me to convince that, look, this is where you'll use algebra, or this is where you need trigonometry. So similarly, when I was studying chemistry, if you show me an enzymatic reaction, if there was a process where I could really understand, okay, this catalysis is actually important in this aspect of a product development, it would really, make one feel enthusiastic about what they are learning, and also eventually think of, okay, how will I improvise this? How can I come up with a better way of doing these things? So if you ask me, I would probably involve a lot of, take inputs from the industry right from the undergrad education, where we are sensitive to the needs of industry, and also that eventually would transform to the needs of the society. So if we focus on making our curriculum more, at least a portion of our curriculum oriented towards applied sciences, that's one way of making our graduates and postgraduates more inclined towards, problem solving approach and taking up research projects that actually mean something. Of course, you need a good critical mass of people who are mostly interested in a reductionist approach, where they are really going deep into understanding the processes and trying to really figure out what exactly happens if I tinker with one amino acid at a protein level. That's essential too. But in the end, what is the use of doing that? That focus always has to be there. Over.
Fantastic. Raghuveer, I'll skip over to you. As a scientist and entrepreneur, what has been some of your biggest challenges in terms of, say, for example, to set up a biotech enterprise? I know you touched on a few of these, but I would like you to focus on more everyday sort of problems. I mean, what are your problems with the regulators, or what are your challenges with getting funding and things like that? So,
Sure.
give us
So
the
there are,
things.
sure. So there are, in my experience of whatever 5-10 years of 10 years of experience in the industry and 3 years as an entrepreneur, I have noticed 3 different types of problems. One is funding. So this funding is also linked to the risk that many of our panel members today have been talking about. So if you have to start a company in lieu of your previous job, so without having any source of income, so that is the biggest risk, right? So we have families, we have bills to pay, we need some sort of regular income. So if you have sufficient funding to run your business, along with some salary to take home, I think that eliminates biggest of the risks. So funding opportunity is one of the important barriers for entry for starting a company, or initiating the journey towards innovation and entrepreneurship. So there have been some improvements in the last few years. There is a flagship program by Karnataka government called Elevate Karnataka that supports the innovators to the tune of 50 lakhs for a commercial ready or idea to POC kind of idea that can be marketed at some point. And there are funding programs by BIRAC, supported by BBT, to the tune of 50 lakhs again. So some of these opportunities have come up in the recent past, but there has to be a substantial increase in this scenario. There have to be some more government support, because if government doesn't take risk on its own citizens, nobody else will. So there has to be a substantial government support to support risk-taking entrepreneurs and innovators. Venture funding, institutional funding, angel networks, those probably will be part of the ecosystem once things start rolling. That is one. Second, the biggest hurdle I see is requirement for compliance. It could be labor laws, it could be a local shops and establishment acts, it could be a PF, it could be pollution control boards, it could be, there are 100 other things. Ask me, I'll give you a lecture for 1 whole hour on compliance. So there have been a lot of improvements on simplifying these requirements. I totally acknowledge that, but there still remain a big challenge. 20% or 30% of the time, all we do is cater to the compliance requirements. So there has to be substantial single window kind of approach, and there has to be a substantial acknowledgement that a startup, a small startup, is probably not going to pollute the world any more than any other entity, and there has to be a move towards self-declaration based compliance framework that are already there in many other countries where innovation is in the forefront. So that is also one of the very important factors to support the innovation. And the third important point is infrastructure. So one of the biggest barrier for entry for us is to have instrumentation infrastructure. So towards that, there are some incubators that have come up, really state-of-the-art incubators. They eliminate the requirement for you to buy all these equipments. You can just pay rent on usage and use them. But obviously, one incubator cannot cater to all of your requirements. You have to rely on multiple incubators or multiple academic institutions to support you. So I think making instrumentation and infrastructure and expertise in academic universities, making them available for use on a fee, usage fee basis or on an arrangement, some kind of arrangement to all the entrepreneurs, startups will significantly improve this situation. One other important thing I want to highlight is the manpower, trained manpower. To some extent, it is unrealistic to expect that a graduate from day one will be able to start working in the industry with full competence, because each of the requirements, each position's requirement in the industry is totally different. So it is probably unrealistic to expect that, but to some extent, if designing the experiment, doing statistics, having a hypothesis to evaluate, having a new hypothesis, designing experiments to evaluate them, analyzing the results, applying statistics. These some of these basic things, if they are aware, I think that is sufficient to absorb them and to train them anyway in the eventual requirement. So I think these are some of the, and there are some schemes from government like BICEP or even BCIL training that have been, putting some effort to solve this issue. They put the students in the industry along with the pay to train them. So I think some of the efforts are paying dividend, and I think there has to be more efforts like this to support the innovation.
Fantastic. And I think I would just like to throw some light on also, I think the Karnataka government also has some bio-innovation clusters. They do have the NASSCOM 10,000 startups ecosystem based in Bangalore. So yes, there are a few out there, but perhaps we need more of these kind of clusters to actually drive more of this startup innovation culture going forward. I would just now, kind of wind up with a few last questions. Dr. Arun, I want to come to you. What do you feel about, the evaluation process on yardsticks for research in medical schools in particular, and I'll come to Professor Hegde on the others. Do you think it's objective enough, or you think there needs some reforms? What are your thoughts on that in a short 1 minute answer?
Are you talking about something on outcomes, research outcomes? Are you specifically looking at what is that research activities is being done in the medical schools? What is that? What you are?
How regulators are evaluating the research, activity in a medical college? I mean, do you think that yardstick of evaluation is objective enough, or does it need any reforms?
It needs a reforms in terms of, kind of a quality, as Dr. Hegde rightly mentioned, the quality and quantity, which is important. At some point, basically now the regulators are saying for being an assistant professor, for being an associate professor or a professor, you need to have a dash amount of publications, which is essential. Now, when you say that, they have not specified where these publications has to be. What is the kind of quality you are expecting? There is something they have outlined, basically, for example, index journals. It's a very vague kind of a statement. Anything in the world is now indexed. All the journals, take it anything tomorrow morning, they will get it indexed in one or the other databases. So there is no question of, you talking about indexation. So now if you say, I have to do, you have to mandatorily do it in a Scopus journals as expected from UGC or a NIRF or a NAC or whatever perspective you call those regulators. They say you have to, your publications has to be either in a Scopus or a Web of Science journal. Now, again, there is a challenge in terms of, for example, a clinician needs a support of to design an experiment from inception. He needs a statistician to be sitting with him for a clinical research if you are looking at seriously to do something of that sort. And you need to have a kind of a ethics committee clearances. So many, you have so many activities which need to be completed to even get a approval to start your project. So it has its own challenges, and within that stipulated time, are you able to produce that kind of a research and which can be published from Scopus or Web of Science journals, which are listed very few Indian journals, and they have a huge amount. They have certain benchmarks. It's very, very difficult for a common clinician to achieve that. I mean to say, scientists, other group of people can easily do it because they have laboratories, they have students, they have PhD students, they have but with the existing workload, with the existing kind of academic pressure, are we able to give sufficient focus on the kind of percent of focus on R&D to come up with the satisfy those kind of a requirement which is expected in a Scopus or a Web of Science journals? Now, this is something very, very challenging for without a proper ecosystem or without a proper support system. How are you going to do? Now, these are something very challenging, and the regulators do realize that there is a problem with this kind of a system. So slowly, each time, each year they are slowly improving. And now it has come to a stage where they are telling you how to do something on a global standards, match those databases and publish your data. But ultimately, what it matters, how it is applicable, as Dr. Guru says, what is that ability to, that knowledge to be translated, or how much citations you will get for those citations, and how it is useful in translation. And these kind of questions still remain, a big challenge, because there is no long-term data, because it's only a short-term vision. You do it for your own promotions or your own focused efforts. There is no, programs which talks about, 15 years data, 20 years data, 25 years data, because, you need to have a biobanking facility. You need to have a kind of database and kind of a, analysis team which sits with you and discusses over the long-term data. Right. Because if you look at any health data from other countries, they have a huge amount of data from 15,000 patients, 20,000 patients, 25,000 patients. Now, when you compare to that, the kind of data what is being generated is a very, very miniature one, which is being done in our hospitals or in our healthcare setup. It's only a short-term vision of getting his promotion. Other than that, we don't see a programs other than 1 or 2 or 3, 4 groups which are very strongly involved in kind of a data generation, which can lead to, which can help in clinician in making those decisions of clinical decision making. So I don't see it to do that. Regulators also should come up with kind of a programs wherein they are looking at a long-term data, as well as the institutions, because see, it's our fraternity doctors have been, like clinicians have been. Today they are with this hospital, somebody offers better position, and tomorrow morning we put the stethoscope and move from there. We don't have labs. It's more like I want to say, I'm very, very frank with this. So where is that network which talks about long-term data, long-term patient care data, and you talk about the intervention? I don't see that kind of thing happening until you have that kind of a network being established in medical schools and kind of a programs. Government comes up with that kind of a strong programs where they involve clinician in a big way to generate that kind of a data. I think that needs to be focused very clear.
Dr. Guru, what do you feel? You're a non-medical, so to say, non-clinical rather institution. Are you satisfactory with the way the yardsticks for research evaluation are set up, or would you look at some reforms in that space?
Well, there's always scope for reforms. Actually, coming from a DBT setup, every one of our DBT institutes have a different mandate. So I think here autonomous institutions have the freedom to set their own benchmarks and a process for evaluation of their research programs and faculty. So what we need to do is to really exercise that autonomy, and I believe probably most of our institutional leaders are thinking in that direction, where it is not really standard. You publish 2 papers, 3 papers, you mentor 2 students, and then you are promoted to the next level. I don't know if that is even sustainable in the longer run, considering the pace with which research is really changing every 5 years. Yeah. So I'm sure, I think there will be change, and we all need to really also change with times, and also come up with new ways of benchmarking, and to come up with new ways of evaluation. I mean, when we are adopting new ways of evaluating our students, I think there has to be better ways of evaluating even the faculty members and researchers and scientists in all our institutes.
Okay.
And I think that's happening.
Fantastic. Professor
Oh.
Hegde, what are your thoughts on that, sir?
I agree with Arun and Guru. I'll go a little bit further, both from the medical side as well as from the basic research. I think in the medical side, there are more avenues for certain particular departments. For example, maybe biochemistry, pathology, and microbiology. They may be able to publish more because they are more geared towards research than the clinical side. On the other hand, the clinicians also are sitting with a lot of patient kind of data that can also be used. But I think a lot of their time goes for treating the patients and the follow up and things like that, and they don't have the time really to even write a research paper. So I think the non-clinical departments, when they involve the clinicians, must actively work within the medical colleges to actually bring these things to fruition, both from the clinical standpoint as well as from the research standpoint. I think within the medical colleges, this needs to happen. I think that will bring it forward. Now, also, as far as regulatory or you're looking for promotion and things like that, there has to be different yardsticks for different departments. I think college-wise or an institute-wise, if you say this is the whole thing about the whole college, then I think it becomes the exercise becomes defeated. Same thing I would argue would apply for the basic research as well. We all know that innovation may not necessarily mean practical utility. For example, a lot of people have IP or patents, and quite a lot of the patents are, if I might say, useless. So, I mean, on the other hand, take, for example, our own Jugaad, which is driven by practical utility, but not necessarily in the normal definition of innovation. So, a lot of our things need to be driven by practical utility. And a lot of us in the academics are driven by discovery and not necessarily innovation, let alone something coming from the direct need. So there has to be a definition of whether you have to contribute towards a research paper versus, let us say, a patent. Now, a lot of times when we are evaluated, the patent is sort of ignored. Although when we are evaluated later on, they'll ask, what have you contributed back in terms of practicality? So how do we now, and it takes several years to take something to the field. So there has to be some sort of accommodativeness in evaluating the processes, both at the medical colleges and the where we do the basic research.
Fantastic, sir. Also, I'll add a little bit of my own experience. We work with medical colleges, health minds, and we see that a lot of the departments don't actually speak to each other. And the preclinical, the paraclinical, and the clinical subjects, there's no one research platform where everybody interacts. I think that's where sort of our systems have failed us in a way, and I think that's something people like Arun, I'm sure, are always constantly trying to fix this problem day in and day out. So, finally, I'll skip over to Raghuveer. Raghuveer, what has been your experience in the ease of doing business as a biotech entrepreneur so far? I know you did touch upon a few of those, but on a more like an everyday thing, what are your challenges, and what is your roadmap? Where do you think entrepreneurial ecosystem of innovation is heading in India?
I see that a lot of things have been improving. I am definitely cautiously, but definitely optimistic about where we are right now and where we are heading. There are significant regulatory challenges. They are in place because of a good reason. We need to have them there, but there has to be a system in place to evaluate them quickly. The decision making has to be probably a little bit faster, and declaration, self-declaration based compliance probably has to come to the forefront is what I believe. See, for example, for our purpose, speaking with my own experience, we are discovering new drugs. So we have to go through biosafety committees, institutional biosafety committee. I'll just give you a very small example. So DBT has mandated that you have to have a biosafety committee for conducting your research. That involves mammalian cell culture or recombinant DNA. Fair enough, I totally agree. It has to be overseen by a regulatory body. But unfortunately, there is also a requirement that there has to be a medical doctor as a member in that committee. As we just discussed, doctors are already overburdened with, once in a while a pandemic situation, their own clinical practice, their research, their obligation to the academics, so on and so forth. It is highly challenging especially for a startup with very limited resources, to have engagement with a doctor for their time. So these are some of the challenges. And then, of course, there is animal ethics committees. There are institutional review boards. There is DCGI. There is pollution control board. So these are some of the problems that we face every day. Arranging funding for our research, having trained manpower, looking at the instruments, looking at the infrastructure, looking at our own design of experiments. That is all, that is all our headache. We signed up to, work on those things. But regulatory framework, I think we also have to take care, because these are in place for a good reason. On the other hand, sometimes they end up being, roadblocks for us. So I think some of them have been improving. They have been all moving online, and decision making has been. Some of them have been automatic, and they are quite quick now. But some of the things, although they are moving in the right direction, they have to be moved at a much faster pace for sure.
Right. No, I think as entrepreneurs, we are all eternal optimists. We always think things will improve, and so anyway, I think we can take one or two questions we have on the forum, and perhaps close after that. So there's somebody who asked, development of COVID vaccines saw remarkable collaboration cutting across government, academia, and industry. Do you see this becoming a norm or benchmark for future projects, or would this remain an isolated event? Professor Hegde, Dr. Guru, anybody who's willing to take this.
Guru, maybe you can take first.
Yeah, I think this has been a amazing learning experience, actually, since we were directly involved in starting from testing of clinical samples to developing diagnostic kits, and then helping many companies develop diagnostic kits, and now partnering with vaccine companies with all our vaccine assays. It's a new learning experience, and I think it depends on our funding agency and the government. It's not easy to sustain this, because immediately, if in my next evaluation, if you say, okay, why did you not publish a single paper last year, I wouldn't be able to say anything, right? Because I've been really busy doing this. So that again brings us back to our evaluation criteria. So if you really want us to invest in partnering with companies and involve in collaborative research, develop vaccines and drugs or diagnostics, then some part of our time needs to be dedicated for that. Therefore, there has to be some way of some compromise formula needs to be worked out. So unless the ecosystem really is facilitative of this approach, and the government thinks this is the right way to move forward, it would be difficult to sustain it in the long run. But I think in the interest of our national priorities, I would believe that the government would like this to be a long-term investment, and would want all of us to really stay invested this way and work this way for the future.
If anybody would like to add anything to this, we are happy to take that remark.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. I sometimes tell other people that COVID-19 has been a godsend in several instances. Although there's a lot of negativity, I mean, let me start from the standpoint that even for the medical students, and I'm sure Dr. Arun Bhagwat will agree, this is a wonderful lesson in social and preventive medicine. You can't beat this because this is, hands-on. You're looking at it as it unfolds. So sometimes we need to actually sit back and think. And over the last several decades, we have gone from infectious disease to chronic conditions. I mean, lifestyle conditions and things like that. So while the former needed different kinds of interventions in the earlier days, the latter have needed sort of management. It's more of management of the chronic conditions. And also we have moved from saving people's lives to extending the life and reducing healthcare costs. So COVID-19 pandemic has sort of pushed us to learn all of these things all over again. And definitely, I think the vaccine development has been a realization that we can actually do this in almost in real time. And even the regulators, for that matter, have been, acceptable to going through this so-called sliding window. So it is a learning experience, but whether we do this for each and every instance, I don't know, because unless we have another pandemic, I don't think we are going to revisit this again. But we don't want pandemics. So I think there has to be more push towards preparedness and prevention, as I said, towards public health and One Health, rather than, but these establishments that we have already started, we cannot dismantle them. So we need to keep them to do something else. And we need to think about that as well.
I think the biggest takeaway from this is to see how this was a great use case, like you all mentioned. Could this become the model of the future? That's the big question, I think. And I think only time will be able to answer it. And I think it's the perseverance of the scientific community to see that this stays on, actually, right? Sorry, Dr. Arun, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. See, these two things have happened very, very strongly here. One is view of regulators, because most of us were facing years of, kind of a problems with the regulators. Now there has been a kind of a opening in health related issues. There has been regulators have been much more positive. That was one thing which has happened. Another thing is very, very important in the health is digitization. The kind of digitization which has happened last, whatever we are seeing today would have happened 5 or 10 years after this. What we have now realizing is a kind of digitization what has happened, kind of health data which is coming in, kind of networking and kind of a data collection and analysis and kind of a algorithms being developed. I think that is mind-boggling. I mean to say that initiative need to be pushed further to ensure to reach the last person. I mean to say the kind of data earlier we had a tough time in recording everything, keep writing and it remains in those files. Now the kind of data which is being generated and being evaluated, I think that needs more technology, needs to be brought in a much, much higher way into public health systems, kind of data collection, analysis, and kind of collation of the data and the interpretation, linking it to those biobankings and those kind of thing. I think that's a wonderful, and having a single kind of a card where one can have a data of each individual health data is going to be something which is very, very important in public health initiatives to ensure that such kind of pandemics, whenever there is any kind of such problems are there, at least we have clear about what is happening, where it is happening, and what is that, how to face, where, who has to produce what, who has to, which vaccine need to be done, where the data has to be, analyzed. I think that kind of a networking need to be completely bought in with the, that's a focus should be more on implementation of technology and digital health. I think that's an area where a lot of activities can be taken up.
That's true.
Can I just make one point? Okay, so if the way we have all come together, all the stakeholders to respond to this pandemic has been really phenomenal. If you carefully look at the technologies that were used to come up with solutions for this, could be diagnostics. The RT-PCR or the protein antibody-based diagnostics are not new. They have been around for a long time. If you look at the therapeutic approaches, mRNA vaccines were not new. They have been around for a long time.
Right.
People were developing them for HIV vaccines, HIV vaccine development. And in fact, both the approved mRNA vaccines were developed based on the platforms developed to identify vaccines. for HIV.
Correct.
And there are other types of vaccines that are being developed. They have all been, under the platforms that were used for many other diseases. SARS or MERS were around, and they by themselves went away, but they have paved way to, to identify methods to develop vaccines for pandemics that are coming next. Regulators have been doing this kind of regulatory approval, quick approvals, not very often, but they have been doing this for some time. So what is amazing is how all of these technologies, how all these techniques, all these stakeholders came together and came up with a solution in both in terms of diagnostics, therapeutics, as well as all these PPEs and preventive measures. So that has been really phenomenal, and that shows how, as a society, when there is a need, we can come together and achieve phenomenal things. So I think when there is a requirement, even in future, we will come together and we will seek out solutions. And I feel very optimistic that this will continue for a long time, as long as there is humanity and there is a requirement for us to be together.
Great. I think it was just a human perseverance and the way everything just came together. I think this has been such a great experience talking to all of you. Thank you very much for all of your time, Dr. Guru, Professor Hegde, Dr. Arun, and Raghuveer. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. So, let's hope for a great 2021 going forward.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be part of Tech Bharat. Thank you so much. We wish you the very best. Good day.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.